Welcome to the Paul Lovette Show, the show where truth meets bold patriotism. I am your host, Paul Lovette, a proud and unapologetic Black American conservative. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at U.S. domestic issues, starting with immigration and the use of the National Guard, and finishing up with Tennessee's law banning transgender drugs for children. Let's start with immigration. So recently during Los Angeles immigration protests and riots, Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass sat around on their duffs for 2 days while lawlessness and violence broke out in downtown LA. And this is reported to us by our border czar, Tom Holman. So after 2 days of all this going on in the streets of Los Angeles, President Trump used his authority under Title 10 of United States Code to basically federalize the National Guard and call up active duty troops. And then he, of course, sent them into Los Angeles to protect federal buildings and federal employees, namely the ICE agents in the area doing immigration enforcement actions. And then in a tortured logic, put it nicely, Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass turned around and then blamed the president for all the violence going on in the streets because he sent in the National Guard. Never mind the 2 days of violent protests in the streets, barricades, and things of that nature, looting ensuing also. But yet, Bass and Newsom thinks it's the president's fault. Once again, overlooking their own drastic failures by not acting immediately. So, speaking of Title 10, let's take a quick look at Title 10 and the statutes that the president used. So, here it is the primary federal law which allows the president to deploy the Guard and active duty forces to basically for U.S. Law enforcement purposes. And then the two sub-statutes that we're using, or that the president used, is 252 and 253. And as we see here, allows the president to use the militia or armed forces to enforce federal law, suppress rebellion if unlawful obstructions, combinations, assemblages, and rebellion make it impractical to enforce federal laws by ordinary means. Key here, this does not require the state to request the assistance. And then 253 allows the president to use the militia or armed forces to suppress domestic violence, unlawful combinations, or conspiracies if they hinder the execution of the laws of any states, the United States, or if they deprive people of their constitutional rights and the state authorities are unable, and in this case unwilling, to protect those rights. And key again, this does not require the state to request this assistance. And then lastly here for Title 10, 12406 is the actual mechanism and authority by which the president can call up the National Guard to federal service, federalize them, and it says here, in times of national emergency, to suppress insurrection or to enforce federal laws, immigration. And once they're federalized, they operate under the federal command and are not subject to state control. So despite all this, the Newsom still, despite all this authority given to the president, Governor Newsom sued the president, and of course it was heard in a liberal San Francisco by a San Francisco federal judge who, as expected, sided with Governor Newsom and basically gave the president like 12 or 24 hours to give the authority, the Guard, back to Governor Newsom. Well, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals immediately stepped in and put a stay on the judge's order and scheduled a hearing for this past Tuesday. Today is Friday, to hear the case. And then yesterday, Thursday, a three-judge panel from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the president. And they wrote, it is likely that the president lawfully exercised his statutory authority to federalize the National Guard under Title 10, which allows the president to call up the Guard into federal service whenever there is a rebellion or danger of rebellion, or when the president is unable to execute laws of the United States. This is yet another drastic failure on the Governor Newsom's part, because the statute is clear that the president can do this, and it was clear that Newsom and Bass were doing nothing to effectively quell the lawlessness going on in the streets. Now let's move on to Arnold Schwarzenegger and his recent appearance on The View television show. And to their much to their chagrin, he talked glowingly of his immigration story of coming to the United States at the age of 21. He shared that he had limited English at this time, but because of the opportunities of our nation, he was able to become a world-class bodybuilder, a Hollywood superstar, and the governor of the state of California. So let's take a look at what he said on The View.
But the key thing also is at the same time that we got to do things legal. That is the important thing, you know. So you got to do things legal. When you come to America, you're a guest, and you have to behave like a guest. You have a responsibility as an immigrant to give back to America and to pay back to America and to go and do something for your community for no money.
Wow, after hearing that, the hosts were pretty much wrecked, because the key points of what he had to say was you must follow the laws of the land that you're going into. You can't just take and not give back. He encouraged immigrants to volunteer, to give back to the society that they are entering. So he was so articulate that I believe Sunny Hostin put her hands on his arm to break his train of thought. But fortunately, he did not, and he powered through and completed his message. So every intellectually honest American will appreciate what the former governor had to say. And I just wish that, which it'll never happen, that the View hosts would be honest and get past their political bias and think what is rational, what is common sense to any American or any nation that is accepting immigrants into their nation. And I would only add to his comments that, when you just choose to go become a citizen of a different nation, that becomes your primary focus. That becomes your primary sense of pride. So you want to learn that culture, the way they do things, learn their language, everything about that nation. You want to embody that, because there's a reason you left the country you left to go to the nation you're immigrating to. So it is very important that you learn everything that you possibly can, and your loyalty is first to that new nation. And we are seeing a lot in the immigration riots and protests that these people, their loyalty is to Mexico or whatever nation they're coming to. They're waving those nations' flags. So clearly there is no loyalty to the United States. The only loyalty they have is to get out and extract out of America whatever financial benefits they can get. So Americans are right to recoil from this behavior, to want to return these people to their home country. And if they want to come into the United States, they need to follow the legal process and make a mental connection and desire to be an American over whatever country they are coming from. Next, I want to take a look at the number of undocumented aliens crossing into the country and being released into the country. Under the Biden administration, we kept hearing that we need legislation in order to secure the border, which was pretty secure before Biden took office. But during his tenure, he opened the border wide open. So we are dealing with the issue of incredible amount of undocumented individuals coming into the country illegally and being released by the Biden administration into the interior of the country. So let's take a look here at the numbers compared. So we can see here, May 2024, under the Biden administration, in the month of May for 2024, 62,000 undocumented were released into the country. And now we look forward a year to May of 2025, zero. Just zero people were released into the United States. So per the New York Post, the U.S. Border Patrol didn't release a single illegal immigrant into the interior of the United States last month. This is the latest victory in President Trump's relentless commitment to securing the homeland. This was a remarkable turnaround from, as we saw, the 62,000 illegals released into the country under the Biden administration just 1 year ago to zero last month under President Trump. Promises made, promises kept. So since President Trump was able to stem the tide of illegals flowing into the country and securing our border with just presidential authority, what was President Biden's agenda behind allowing all these people in the first place? Well, that's a subject for another episode, but I will leave you with this. It has to do with the census and the allocation of representatives for Congress, which is based on the census count. Now let's move on to the United States Supreme Court upholding Tennessee's ban on transgender drugs for children. The Supreme Court on Wednesday upheld a Tennessee law prohibiting transgender drugs and surgeries for children, a major win for common sense Americans, parents, and their children. The court ruled 6-3 in United States versus Scarametti that Tennessee's law does not violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Tennessee Attorney General Jonathan Scarametti defended the law before the High Court in December, saying it was a matter of protecting kids from the consequences of decisions that they cannot fully understand. In yesterday's release, the Supreme Court's decision, Chief Justice Roberts found that Tennessee's law wasn't about unfairly targeting transgender people or discriminating based on sex. He saw it as a reasonable effort by the state to protect children by regulating medical procedures where there was still ongoing debate and potential risk. And he believed that the state had the right to make that decision. So with the whole transgender surgeries, we need to look at Europe, which is surprisingly way ahead of us on this issue. In Britain, they recently ruled against this also, and they've also have banned their national health from doing these sorts of things to children with gender issues, because they're making permanent changes to their bodies. In many cases, they're being sterilized from these drugs. They will never ever be able to have biological children of their own. And these are decisions that kids are making 10 to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. They haven't even made it through puberty. So we all know that we may feel certain ways at a certain point in youth, but then a couple years later, we've grown out of it. So I don't know how this madness has infected the United States to do these sorts of things to our kids, but fortunately, it seems like logic and reason is starting to prevail, and I applaud this decision by the Supreme Court. So once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification buttons to keep up with the latest information that we put out.